Hey guys, welcome to Motoroids.com. My name is Amit and these are the two most capable on and off-road motorcycles that we have right here in India right now. In this segment that is. And a lot of people have been asking us which of these two is the better to go for. Adventure motorcycling is something which is the buzzword right now. And we tested them very thoroughly today. We rode them on the road, off the road. We tested their off-road capabilities and I think I have a conclusion as to which motorcycle is the better of the two. But before that, I'll want to run you through all the specialties of these motorcycles, all the highlights, all the advantages and all the disadvantages. And let's start off with the GS, which is the newer kid on the block, and it boasts of a reverse inclined engine, which is a liquid cooled unit. It's a 4-valve unit with fuel injection and is the more powerful of the two. It produces 33 HP of power and 28 Newton meters of torque. On the other hand, you have the Himalayan, which has 411 cc of a single, which is air cooled, not a liquid cooled unit. The power here is less at 24.5 HP, but the torque is more by 4 Newton meters and it's very perceptible throughout the rev range. The other thing that you do well to know is that the peak power is produced at 9,500 on the GS and it's produced at 6,500 RPM on the Himalayan, which essentially means that the GS is the sportier of the two. The engine has a more revvy, more sporty feel to it on the GS, and the Royal Enfield Himalayan feels a lot torquier and has a lot of meat lower down the rev range, and that essentially separates the two bikes in the way they behave on the road and off it, and how is I'm going to let you know in a bit. Now, these are supposed to be off-road motorcycles, adventure motorcycles, while the Himalayan is custom made to do well off the road. Its front wheel, which is 21 inches, those spoked wheels, and its very bare bones chassis are testimony to the fact that it's meant to do well off the road in a single-minded fashion. However, the GS is a motorcycle which has good manners on the road and can do fairly well off the road as well. Those upside down forks, those tubeless tires, those alloys and that sporty engine should tell you that this is not a motorcycle which is meant for out and out off-roading, and is a motorcycle which is meant to go on-road primarily and do that casual off-roading bit whenever it's required. So that's the basic differentiation between these two motorcycles. The Royal Enfield Himalayan is a very capable off-roader. It can really take you off the tar in a very capable fashion, while the GS can take you off the tar and can do a fair bit of off-roading but is not quite as capable as the Himalayan. Now, the difference, as I mentioned before, can be attributed primarily to this front wheel. This 21-inch front wheel really lends the Himalayan with the capability to go over bad surfaces. Also, when you are tackling an obstacle, the Himalayan gives you a lot more confidence. Even during the air time, the Himalayan feels a lot more stable, and when both the wheels are off the ground, the Himalayan gives you a lot more confidence than the GS, which feels a little more stiff up front, but at the rear it feels magical. And in that context, when you swing a leg over the GS, you'd realize that it's uncannily high. At 835 mm, the seat height is very tall, and the shorter riders will have a bit of a problem, but it sinks in, and the suspension is so soft that once you sit on the motorcycle, even without moving it, you can feel the softness of the suspension. It's so very evident on the road that there is no comparison in the comfort levels of the two motorcycles. The GS feels decidedly the more comfortable of the two, and what really aids that is its wider, plusher and better made seat. And the moment you rest your bum on the GS, you realize that this is going to be the motorcycle which is going to keep you more comfortable over longer journeys. So if you're going to be traveling on the road, there is no two ways about it that the GS is the more capable of the two machines. In terms of performance also, the GS is decidedly quicker. Its acceleration is much better, and its top speed also is much better. Not just that, we also did a little test of 40 to 80 kilometers per hour acceleration on the two motorcycles, and in third and fourth gears, both the GS was incomparably quicker to the Himalayan. So in that context, on the road, the GS is definitely the better motorcycle of the two and would take you places in a much faster, much swifter fashion. Now, in terms of in-gear speeds, the GS will take you to 58 kilometers per hour in the first gear, 83 kilometers per hour in the second gear. The third gear will take you to 105, and the fourth gear will take you to 130 kilometers per hour. It's very similar, the gearing on the Himalayan as well, which will take you to 58 kilometers per hour in the first gear. The second gear will take you to about 85 kilometers per hour. The third gear again will take you to 110 kilometers per hour, and the fourth gear will take you to 130 kilometers per hour. But the progress after 110 kilometers per hour on the Himalayan is not very brisk. The GS, on the other hand, keeps going very briskly all the way till 145 kilometers speedo indicated speed, and feels a lot swifter, a lot more capable on the road. Both the motorcycles come with dual channel ABS. However, it's the GS which has the more reassuring brakes of the two, and anything above 110 kilometers per hour on the Himalayan feels a little bit scary, because when you squeeze the lever on the right hand side to apply the front brakes, the stoppage is not all that quick, and it takes a little bit of time before the speed is reined in to safe speeds. However, on the GS, the reaction is very quick, and those tires also are a lot better in terms of providing the grip on the road at least. The tires on the GS are Metzeler Tourance units, and up front it's got 110 section, while at the rear it's got 150 section rubber. Both are on an off-road tires. On the Himalayan you have inferior rubber, which is tubed and doesn't quite provide as much grip as you find it on the GS, and the section of the tires is also not as wide. So up front you have 90 section, at the rear you have 120. So on the road and off it, the grip, if you really talk specifically about it, is better on the GS. The front suspension on the GS is an inverted fork, while here it's a conventional telescopic fork with a gated slider. However, it's the Himalayan which feels a lot easier to ride in off-road conditions owing to its slightly softer suspension. The setup on the GS is slightly more road biased, and it has its advantages in terms of its road handling, in terms of its stability, and the way it feels when you're riding it very fast around corners. The GS definitely has a better composure, while the Himalayan feels slightly scary after you cross 110 kilometers per hour. It's also not the motorcycle that you want to be bashing around corners. The GS lends itself better for that purpose. Talking about the seat height that we talked about for the GS as well, the seat height here is lower and lends itself much better for use by shorter riders. So in that sense, the Himalayan is a motorcycle which is much easier to be ridden by shorter riders. Also, when you sit on the motorcycle, one very uncanny thing that you will realize is that the position of the foot pegs is slightly more rear set on the Himalayan than on the GS. So that's a difference that you will instantly realize. And the handlebar also is not as wide as the GS. However, the handlebar here is slightly taller, and that really lends itself very well for use off the road. So while you're riding off the road, the reach of the handlebar while standing up on the pegs is much better on the Himalayan, and that offers much better control than on the GS. So that's an advantage that the Himalayan has over the GS. The ground clearance on both the motorcycles is more than sufficient for handling bad roads. However, the one advantage that the Himalayan has is that it comes with this steel bash plate to protect the engine, while the cowl here on the GS is a plastic unit. In terms of illumination, both the motorcycles don't come with LED illumination for the headlights. Both have conventional bulbs with normal reflector. They don't have projectors as well. However, both the motorcycles come with LED tail lamps, and in that sense both are evenly matched. If you really look at it in terms of the spread and the throw, I think the GS has a slight advantage there. In terms of instrument console, if you look at the Himalayan, it comes with a whole bunch of lights and a combination of analog and digital displays, and it looks like the console of a jet plane, if you really ask me. There are just too many of them. The tacho is here, you have the speedo here, and you have this digital display here which gives you a lot of information, including odo trip and the gear engaged as well. You get your time and the temperature. The fuel gauge is analog, and then you also have the compass here, which is not there on the GS. However, some very important things for a tourer on the instrument console include readily available information about fuel consumption, and that's where the GS aces the Himalayan. And the fully digital instrument console of the GS gives you critical information about fuel consumption, which includes average fuel consumption and distance to dry, and I think that's very important from a touring perspective. However, having the information about how much distance you can go with the fuel is not going to be of much help when your fuel tank itself is not meant for touring, and in that context the GS has the smaller fuel tank of the two, only 11 liters of it, and the Himalayan with 15 liters of fuel tank has a significant advantage there. The fuel efficiency on the Himalayan in the real world is also better than the GS. It will give you 30 kilometers to the liter and slightly above if you ride it with a light right wrist. The GS on the other hand is going to return 25 to 30 kilometers to the liter, and with that limited fuel tank capacity, the range is always going to be limited. So from a touring perspective, the GS has its limitations in terms of the range, and the Himalayan aces it. Now the other very important thing when you're touring is visibility, and I believe that the rear view mirrors on the Himalayan are pretty bad. They are not good at all. Firstly, they are not wide enough and they don't give you a very good view of what's coming from behind, and secondly, they are very flimsily made. So the moment you cross 80-90 kilometers per hour, they tend to fall down with the force of the wind coming from the opposite direction, and that isn't a very safe thing for a rider who wants to be aware of what's happening around him. So in that context, these mirrors need to be changed immediately. They need to be sturdier and they need to be wider. The mirrors on the GS are better and they're wider, they're sturdier. However, I think these mirrors could also have done with a bit more width and a slightly bigger size so that the visibility was better. In terms of the seat quality, I really believe that the seat on the GS, at least for the rider, is much better than the Himalayan. The padding here and the overall comfort, the width is in a league of its own, and combined with the cushy suspension, this is one of the most comfortable seats you'll find anywhere. The pillion seat is also reasonably comfortable, but it's not the most comfortable of the seats that you'll find anywhere because of this big carrier which can help you plant a pannier here and also doubles up as a grab rail, and in some cases you'll find the lower back of the pillion rider striking against this carrier here, so that can be a bit of an issue. Also, the seat could probably have been slightly wider and bigger for the pillion rider. The Himalayan seat also is reasonably comfortable by itself, but in comparison to the GS, it's not as comfortable. The pillion seat here, however, is a little bit more accommodating, and the grab rail and the carrier that you have here is also a little less intrusive. The other very important thing about off-road motorcycles is foot pegs, and if you look at the quality of the foot pegs, I think the overall quality of the foot pegs on the GS is better than the Himalayan. And while here also you have these removable rubber blocks which once removed will allow you to have a better grip on the foot pegs, both up front and on the brake, and they are pretty well made by themselves. But if you compare them with the foot peg quality of the GS, it really shines, and the build quality here is definitely in a league of its own. So in terms of the overall build quality, not just the foot pegs, but overall I think the GS is much better built, and the finish, be it the paint quality, be it the consistency of the panels and the way the bike comes together, I think the GS aces it, and the overall build quality here is much better than the Himalayan. Now, talking specifically about the off-road capability of the two motorcycles, if you're someone who wants to have a lot of fun on his motorcycle, I think the one big mistake that Royal Enfield have done is that despite having provided ABS on the Himalayan, which is a very good thing by itself, they have not made it switchable, which is a bit of a blunder, because when you are off the road, you want to use the rear brake, you want to slide the rear wheel so that you can turn the motorcycle in much sharper, and that's something that you simply cannot do with the Himalayan because the ABS here is not switchable. It is on the GS, and I think that's one thing that goes in the GS's favor. However, having said that, when you actually take the motorcycle off the road and you are clearing obstructions, the Royal Enfield Himalayan gives you a lot more confidence than the GS, which does feel like a slightly road-biased motorcycle. And while the front wheel is in the air, you realize that the suspension is slightly on the stiffer side, and you can sometimes also feel it bottoming out when the motorcycle lands, while there is no such thing on the Royal Enfield, which simply glides over bad roads. And even when it lands after dropping from a relatively higher altitude, the suspension simply soaks in the harsh landing without any problem whatsoever. The big Achilles heel on the Royal Enfield Himalayan is the fact that it comes with tube tires, and that's down to the fact that it comes with spoked wheels, and it's not easy to put those tubeless tires on these spoked wheels, and very few motorcycles in the world actually offer that feature. However, Mr. Lal, when we discussed it with him last time, said that they're working on that option, and hopefully they should be able to offer that to the buyers in this segment in the next few years. But having said that, having tubeless tires, the GS offers you the advantage of being able to repair the tires in case of a flat. Now, in terms of weight, the GS weighs in at 170 kg curb, while the Himalayan is heavier of the two at 185 kg. So the GS has an advantage of 15 kg, and it really shows in the way it handles on the road. It feels nimbler, more planted, and you can really manage to dip in and pick it up and ride it faster around corners, much faster than the Himalayan. The composure is much better, and despite its huge visual girth, the GS really feels very light and nimble once you are aboard it and you can maneuver it very easily. Both the motorcycles have very small turning radius, so they are both very easy to maneuver in tight spaces. So in that sense, they are both very easy to ride. Now in terms of the engine character, since the Royal Enfield Himalayan has the more torque of the two, and also it's a long stroke motor with an engine that doesn't rev as high as the GS, the in-gear tractability of the Himalayan is better than the GS, which feels a little too eager to rev and induces a wheel spin even when you don't want it to. So in that sense, the torque availability on the Royal Enfield Himalayan is better, and it starts pulling at 2000 rpm. So for example, if you're in 5th gear, which is the top gear of the Himalayan, you'd be able to pull along from 40 kilometers per hour. However, if you're riding the GS in the 5th gear, it won't pull along before 45 kilometers per hour. So the tractability on the Himalayan is slightly better than that of the GS, and which makes it a better motorcycle, not just within the city, but also when you're off-roading. That sensation of torque that you get is much better on the Himalayan, and a wheel spin is not induced unless you really want it to be induced. So in that sense, the Himalayan is slightly better from purely a city and off-road riding perspective. Now before we conclude this comparo, we need to be very clear about this one thing, which is the most important thing in any comparo, and it's the price. So the motorcycle that you see here with the much sought BMW logo is double the price that of the Himalayan, and at 3.5 lakh rupees ex-showroom Mumbai, the GS is a very expensive motorcycle. The Himalayan at 1.7 lakh rupees ex-showroom is less than half of that. So in that sense, if there are some advantages with the GS, they do come for a price. And to mention those advantages in a nutshell, the first advantage that you have is the fact that it's a BMW, and that badge by itself gives you a lot more bragging rights than having the Royal Enfield under your bum. The second important advantage that this motorcycle has is that the overall hardware on this motorcycle is better than the Himalayan. It gets upside down forks, and the engine here is a more advanced unit than that of the Himalayan. The chassis here is a trellis frame and is much sturdier. The road manners of this motorcycle are much better than the Himalayan. It's a much more confidence inspiring motorcycle than the Himalayan. The brakes are better, the acceleration is better, and the top speed is significantly better than the Himalayan. The top speed here is about 145 kilometers per hour, which is true, and on the Himalayan you'll have 130 kilometers per hour, true. So that's a difference of 15 kilometers per hour, but it's also about how you get there. The G310 GS feels brisk all the way to its top speed, while the Himalayan starts panting and losing pace after 110-120 kilometers per hour. So this motorcycle feels a lot more refined and is very capable on the road and reasonably capable off the road. The Himalayan, on the other hand, despite having a price tag only half that of GS, is definitely the better off-road motorcycle of the two. And if you really want to compare the capability of the two motorcycles off the road, I would go to the extent of saying that the Himalayan inspires a lot more confidence than the GS, and is definitely the motorcycle which is more rugged and would be able to take rough terrain in its stride with a lot more ease. The other big advantage that the Himalayan has is that it's a Royal Enfield, so the service costs are not going to be as high as the BMW GS, so the maintenance is relatively simpler and it's going to be less expensive also. And the other big advantage that the Himalayan has is that it's got better fuel efficiency and it's got a bigger tank, which makes it a motorcycle with the better range. So if you're really going to be touring, there will be lesser fuel stops, and in places like Ladakh where you don't have many fuel stations, that becomes a very important parameter. So there you have it then. If you have the money and most of your touring is going to be on the road, with a part of it being off the road, the GS is the pick of the two, and this definitely is the more refined motorcycle of the two, the brisker and the better built motorcycle of the two. The Himalayan, on the other hand, is the motorcycle if you are a true adventurer and you want to go off the beaten trail more often than the other people. And if you really take the price into the equation, the Himalayan does present itself as a better bargain of the two motorcycles. So if you're on a budget, the Himalayan should be the pick for you. A lot of people had a lot of reservations about buying the Himalayan after it had its initial run of problems. However, Royal Enfield claimed to have fixed most of those problems, and we actually did a very detailed review of the BS4 Himalayan when it was launched in the FI Avatar, and seems like most of the issues that dogged it initially have been taken care of, and the Himalayan is a lot more reliable than how it was initially. So you can now buy this motorcycle without all the worries that you had when this motorcycle was initially launched. I really hope that this video was of some use to you. If you liked it, hit the like button, subscribe to Motoroids, hit that bell notification icon, and until next time, then this is Amit Changani signing off. Rev hard, rev free, and ride safe.